All right. I think we're good to go now. So I think I should do this too. So funny. Anyway, what's good, everybody? I think we're good to roll right now. I am excited to get into some of this particular topic for everybody that's really interested in getting into web dev. You know, the first thing that you're going to hear people talk about when getting into web dev, you're going to hear people talk about, oh, you need HTML, oh, you need CSS, oh, you need JavaScript. And, the truth is, you do need all three of those things. But before you can do any of that, you need to set your computer up so that you can work with those things in a productive and professional way. So that's what we're going to actually talk about real quick, setting up those particular services that you're going to need. And I'll kind of run through the setup that I'm using right now, having been building web apps for a number of years now. So let's get it on and popping. So first thing I'm going to need to do is open a new window on my machine, and that will be the base of all of this. So I'm using Brave, and just a little note about Brave. Brave is a Chrome-based browser. So if you're familiar with Google Chrome, this browser was built on top of Google Chrome, right? Your browser is really important when you start doing web dev work because you're going to be using the browser often to validate the work that you're doing in the code. So there's a number of different browsers, right? Some of y'all might have Safari if you're on a Mac like me. Some of y'all might have Firefox. Some of y'all might have Google Chrome if you're on a Windows-based machine, right? Some of y'all might have Internet Explorer. And I ain't judging if you have Internet Explorer, but if you have Internet Explorer, try to download one of those other three things that I just mentioned. Mostly not because we try to talk down on Internet Explorer, but some of these more modern browsers, Google Chrome, Firefox, etc., Safari even, have better developer tools embedded in them for your convenience as a web developer. So I use Brave because Google Chrome, which actually is what Brave is built on top of, has a great set of features for developers. And so we'll talk a little bit about those features in a bit. But the first thing you need to do is install a browser for yourself. So you could do that by going to the Google Chrome and by like downloading Google Chrome. Of course, you could do like quick download Google Chrome, right? And install Google Chrome, or like I did, install Brave or install Firefox. That is your choice. But you need a solid browser to do this work. Beyond the browser itself, right? You're going to need to have a text editor, right? And the text editor is going to be an important part of your programming journey because what you use a text editor for, and I'll share mine real fast. What you use a text editor for is actually writing all of the code, right? So everything that you're going to be writing is going to be code that's going to have a role in whatever it is you're developing. The text editor that I particularly like to use is Visual Studio Code, which is a Microsoft-based product, but Visual Studio Code itself is a robust text editor. And what makes it interesting and compelling is the fact that VS Code, as it's shortened most times, is a text editor that we use that has a lot of features built into it to make your job easier as a web dev. Like some of those things include the fact that with VS Code, right, you can create new projects. So let me just launch a new project real quick just to show y'all a little bit. Let's just do this and do this. Actually, I'm so sorry, y'all. My bad. Create a new folder in here and just call it intro. Let's just call it like that. So one of the things that makes VS Code such a cool text editor, and this is common across different text editors, but one of the things that I particularly like about VS Code is the fact that Visual Studio Code has a number of different elements inside of one experience to make your development experience easier. So we can create new files very easily in VS Code, right? And like if I wanted to start a HTML file, I could do that fairly easily. I can also change the language to be different programming languages. And so VS Code actually supports a number of different programming languages, as you can see here. Any of the ones that you're probably familiar with are here. Java's there, Python's there. For us, we're going to be writing a lot of HTML. We're going to write a lot of JavaScript, right? So we want to be able to write all these things in one space, right? CSS is also here, sure, but I can't see it right now, right? CSS. and everything else that we might expect to get into as we continue our web dev journey. So what's cool about VS Code is that you can use this one text editor for all of the stuff you need to do, front end, back end, server side, client side, all that stuff can exist in VS Code. And on top of the fact that you can use it to write a number of different files, it also has a built-in terminal so that you can easily access the terminal very quickly and use all that in one place. Browser and text editors are going to be super important in those are like the most important two tools. The next couple of tools we're going to breeze through are also important to download, mostly for the workflow of how you're going to be working with particular your files and getting your files to the point that you actually have them on in deployment. I'm sorry, I'm like pausing because I'm reading the chat at the same time and folks are going in on Edge. I'm crying. That's actually funny. Cool. So so right now you got a browser, right? That's going to be development home for seeing everything you're working on. You're going to have your text editor. The text editor is going to be the place where you're going to experience a lot of the actual work that you're doing is in your text editor. The next couple tools, like I said, aren't necessarily like beyond those two. Those are really kind of the only two you really need to get started. But these are tools that I will recommend that you have on your machine because they're going to actually improve your workflow tremendously. The first one, especially for all my web dev homies, right? The first one that we're gonna really want to get familiar with is Git. Of course, Git is used in not just web dev stuff, right? We can use Git. Sorry, I'm gonna go back to the homepage. We can use Git for all types of projects, right? And Git is what we call a source code management system, version control system. So what we use Git for is managing the files that we're working with as we're working with them. So as I'm making changes to a project, I'll use Git to keep track of my changes and ensure that I have a solid record of what's going on in those files at different points in time, especially if I'm working with teams, because everyone's going to be working on the same file and we want to make it so that it's not hard for us to see what's actually happening at these different points in the life cycle of building our application. So Git is really important just for managing our files. But for our web dev folks, one of the most important tools you're going to end up downloading because it is important for your for running your code on your machine is Node, right? Especially if you're going to get way into JavaScript as a format of writing your front end and using JavaScript in the back end. There's no way around using Node. Node essentially is a runtime for JavaScript. So it is what allows us to run JavaScript on our computer. JavaScript typically runs on a browser, which is one of the reasons why we need to have browsers, right? Because if we don't have the browser, we can't actually see the JavaScript and interact with our code as we normally would. And we'll get into a lot of that in a bit. Installing Node, though, allows you to run JavaScript on your machine, which opens you up to way more workflows than if you didn't use Node-based libraries for running your code. So this is more for when we get into more JavaScript land, which, you know, again, some of these things don't have to happen immediately, but if we want to talk about modern tools and how we actually work on projects nowadays, we're not gonna even. There's no question that we're gonna use Node. We're gonna have to use it. So with those, four things, I guess we have Git, we have Node, we have the browser, and we have the text editor. We actually are kind of solid, right? Everything else is more just like your personal preference on how you do your work and what your goals are for how you accomplish your work, right? But if you get VS Code, you get a solid browser like Brave or Google Chrome or Firefox, you get Node on your machine installed, and you get Git. Say no more, fam. You basically a web developer. Tell them to hand you a job right now because you're basically a web developer. You know what I'm saying? Like, but those four things really kind of make up the most of the life of the work that we do. And of course, now and then you'll see that there's a need to have extra tools on your machine, right? Like if you're on a Mac, for instance, you'll see like installing Git, for instance, and they're like, hey, you know, install Git. And they're like, oh, well, if you want to download for Mac, use Homebrew. And then you got to go and install Homebrew. And if you never installed Homebrew, you're like, well, how do I install this? And something like this, you have to actually use your terminal for, right? So these are terminal-based commands that actually will install commands on your machine. Homebrew is a good example of this because this particular command installs a library on your machine that allows for you to install other packages just through the terminal. And I'm saying terminal a lot. You heard me talk about it in VS Code, but the terminal is it. Part of the reason I didn't mention is because the terminal is kind of built into your machine. On a Mac, right? We call the terminal a terminal, right? And I'll actually share my whole screen so you can see this real quick, right? On a Mac, we have an app built into our device called a terminal, right? And the terminal is essentially a command line prompt where you can type commands, right? And just like use the text editor here to like do all the types of things that you might expect to have to use a bigger app for. You can do all within the terminal. The terminal was the original way that we were working with computers, right? Commands that we were executing to the operating system and things being changed. On a Windows machine, you also have a terminal. It's just called something different. It's called a command prompt on Windows, I believe. So to open up a command prompt on your Windows machine, you'd want to use the Windows key. And I think if you type Windows E, it pulls up your searches and stuff, and you can type in there command prompt, right? Click Windows, type command prompt, and you should see something. If you type command, you should see something pop up. Somebody confirm that in the chat for me. You know what I'm saying? It's been a minute since I used a Windows machine, but I'm pretty sure Windows E does something for you. But yeah, I mean, I could be capping. I could definitely be capping. But at the end of the day, so long as you can click the Windows machine, see all of your files and stuff, search in there for the command, you'll see command prompt or command line. Those are equivalent things. For something like Homebrew, for instance, right? This is the type of system where you're going to end up using the terminal quite a bit in your work. And so to install something like this, right, it's saying, hey, copy this and then paste that into a terminal or a shell prompt, right? Which means, hey, I got to go ahead, open the terminal, and then paste that command and press enter, and then it will go ahead and install the thing. You might start seeing things like, hey, you need to have access to your admin password, and this is where you maybe have to put in admin credentials on your machine based on, what user privilege you have. So in my case, put my little password in there, and it'll install what it needs to install. The thing about this, though, it goes to say, one of the hidden things that a lot of people don't actually know when you start doing web dev stuff is you actually are going to have to use the terminal quite a bit, right? So if you're used to using the terminal because you worked with Java or you work with Python, you're running your scripts through the terminal, or you're familiar with like terminal-based commands like Linux or Windows-based commands. If you are, great, because you're going to keep using those. If you're not, this is a good moment to let you know that that's one thing that is kind of surprising about like web dev stuff is that you're still going to use the terminal quite a bit. And it shouldn't be something that you get scared of. It should be something you embrace, because knowing how to use a terminal is important, not just because some people say like programming ranks. If you don't know how to use a terminal, you're very junior or whatnot. Realistically, now most work in the modern kind of cloud-based architecture, we're not using computers where we have access to a visual screen all the time. We're not using a computer that I could download an app and click on the app and watch the app do all these, whatever this motion is. I don't even know what I'd call this. You can't do that on a server, right? On a server, you only get things like a command line, right? And you have to get used to working with command line interfaces because of the fact that you're not always going to have a GUI. You're not always going to have like a visual thing to actually interact with and click on and drag your mouse and all of those types of luxuries, as some might say. So that's one thing that's hidden about like the web dev community that you might not know. But your boy Cam, I'm here to tell you that you got to know that. You got to know some terminal-based, Linux-based, or Windows-based command prompts to get used to working on command line interfaces. Now, those are things we can work toward, right? Homebrew, these are things we can download if we need to. But those core things that I mentioned before, Node, the browser, the text editor, and Git, those don't really go away, right? Big projects use Git to manage themselves. You're going to always need a browser to see what you're talking about. You're going to always need somewhere to write the code, whether you use VS Code or a different text editor or a different place to do your code editing. You're still going to need something to write the code out. You could use Microsoft Word and try that, but the value of some of these tools are that they're built to actually make your workflow easier and more more professional. They just build a lot of tools out that make your life easier. So that's like a quick rundown of like the most important tools you got to download. And I'll make sure once this video finishes, I'll drop a link to all of those things in the PDF that I made that has like a good guide of all the stuff to download. And boom, then you should be Gucci. You should be good to go. And I think now is good to see with all of those things, how can we actually start implementing it? How do we actually start using it to do some web dev based stuff? So if you're ready for that, just give me a thumbs up, you know what I'm saying? Just to make sure that y'all are here, you know what I'm saying? I'm not a real YouTuber. I just pretend like I'm a YouTuber when I'm going live on YouTube, you know what I'm saying? Like, comment, and subscribe. Click the little bell icon for notifications. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, everybody's ready. They're like, yo, Cam, get to the program, bro. You're talking too much. I got it. Got it, y'all. Got it. You didn't have to scream. It's okay. So let's talk about it, right? So let's say we have all these things installed. I'm going to just close this and pretend like everything is good, right? Let's say we have everything installed on our machine and we're trying to get going on some web dev stuff. Well, let's talk a little bit about what that's going to mean for us, right? Essentially, what that means is that we're going to have, we're going to be trying to build out a web page, right? And web pages are not so complicated that you can't build them, but complicated enough that we got to talk a little bit about how they're structured and what we got to know in order to build them, right? So what makes up a web page is very simply HTML, right? If you know what HTML is, drop what you think it means in the chat. You know what I'm saying? If you don't know what it means, drop what you think is the funniest acronym for what HTML could mean. Be appropriate. But you know what I'm saying? Just to make sure folks understand what I say HTML, what we're actually talking about here. So I see some folks in the chat, you know what I'm saying? Like, all right. Hypertext markup language. Okay, good. Y'all actually knew what it meant. That's fire. I'm grateful that I didn't see any crazy acronyms down there. But yeah, the hypertext markup language. And hypertext markup language sounds like a crazy futuristic anime type language that, you know, folks might be speaking. But it actually is just a framework that was invented by the creator of the web to allow for us to transfer information in a document. That document is going to hold a number of different types of elements, and those elements are going to have corresponding data tags, for lack of better words, little programmatic syntax that allows for the document to know, hey, you're looking at this element, or I'm creating this element. So it created this standardized document that really was a language. That was like hey, you know, use this syntax and use this type of structure in order to create the experiences that another person looking at that same document can understand. So that's what makes HTML interesting, is that it creates a document for us that we can then use to structure a web page out that is going to contain a standardized syntax of information that if we sent it to somebody else that's looking for an HTML document or is ready for HTML, they'll see the same thing that we expect them to see. So let's go ahead and start building our first HTML page. And in the process, I'm going to introduce a couple more tools that, if you're using a text editor like VS Code, might make your life even more simple. So boom, I'm going to start by just opening VS Code, because like I said, there's a lot that you can do with work just off opening your text editor alone. And if you want to follow along, that's great. Just give me a thumbs up if you're following along, and I'll make sure I pace down a little bit so you can do it with me. If you're not following along and you're just like, hey, I'm just here for the ride, just say, I'm ready in the chat, and we'll get it popping. Of course, this is being recorded, so you can always do this again at your own pace. But I like to pace it down, and folks are like live coding with me while I'm live coding. You know what I mean? It's just mutual programmer respect. Awesome, cool, appreciate that. Nice, look at y'all. Look at that. Joseph said, "I'm ready. I'm ready too, bro. Let's get this popping." So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna open VS Code. This is my text editor. This is like the land. This is where everything's gonna happen for me. So in order to make my experience, and again, I'm just gonna drop gems on professionalism just off of what I know. Take with it what you will. One of the best pro tips I could give you when you start building web apps out is, now that you have everything installed, right? Maybe you pause the video, install everything, you come back, and now you're looking at a fresh VS Code window like this. Well, one of the things that's going to be really important for you is file organization. And again, that's one of those things that people are going to talk to you about, right? Like, just like they're not going to tell you, hey, you're going to actually use the code, the text editor. I mean, what am I talking about? You're going to be using the command line a lot, right? You're going to also be leveraging a lot of different files and different projects, different folders, all of those things. And if you're not clear on like your code organization from day one, it can really come back and bite you in the butt. And so I want to really instill on y'all like the need, right? Like you need to do it to organize your code in a cohesive way. And I'll show you like a simple but effective way that I like to organize my code files, just to keep things we're all on the same page here. And actually, my computer was like messed up a while, so there really isn't a lot of files on here. I did pull some from my external hard drive, but we'll pretend like I don't have much, and I'll show you how I would get started, and maybe you might follow a similar pattern for yourself. When I start projects in VS Code, I like to open folders. That's the secret. Open a folder, right? Even if you don't have a folder yet, open a folder, because you can create a new folder. The reason why folders are helpful is because code organization. It'll keep everything in one place, which is going to end up being really helpful for you for a lot of reasons when you're ready to actually save your code to GitHub or push your code to a web app. You know what I mean? Put on a server. Like, all of those things become way easier if you actually have everything already organized in a folder. So my first thing when I go into VS Code, if I'm starting a new project, I always click open, like with this folder icon, or like I go to file and I click open folder up there. What that's gonna do is it's gonna pull up. I don't know if y'all can see my like file explorer while I'm sharing my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you actually can see like my little file explorer. You see like
No, we can't.
Okay, cool. That's security. Hey, I appreciate them. I appreciate them for doing that, because sometimes that could be crazy. But what basically what pulls up is like your file explorer, right? So it'll show you like your folder, like my desktop folder, downloads, documents, the typical folder architecture of your machine. What I like to do, and this is just a simple way, I like to create a folder that I'm gonna hold my projects in, right? Now, you can approach this like, I'm going to create one big folder first and then create multiple folders in that big folder, or you can create one folder at a time in different places, whatever floats your boat. I'm going to just speak to it as if I'm doing this like y'all. I have never done this before, and I want to do it in a way that I will remember. So one of the things that I like to do, and actually, let me show you this in I could show you this through my Mac Finder. Will be easier. We'll use the GUI for a quick second, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So let me reshare my screen so y'all can see that. So basically, remember, your computer is just a big storage device of all your files, right? Your machine, your home folder has a number of different like kind of folders that are already created there to hold certain type of information, right? You have a desktop, you have downloads folder, documents folder. Like, these are typical folders created on your operating system. My thing is, I like to make sure that I create a folder that I can use for just like computer science, computer programming things. So on my main like user folder, and my main user folder where all those other big folders are, I will typically create a big folder in here. And like, I might call that like, something like CS projects if I'm like y'all, right? Or like CS or comp or something like that. A while back, I created a comp folder, and in that folder, I have a number of different folders for all things professional, personal projects, all types of stuff go in that folder. The reason why I do this is so now I have one folder, and now I can just make sure I save everything in that one folder. You could do the same thing and put that folder on your desktop. You could put it in your documents. You can put it wherever you want. But I like creating one folder as a starting point. That inside of this folder is where I will be putting my organization together. Well, I'll be things like, hey, like if you're doing like web dev stuff, like I could put a folder in here called web dev. And then here might be where I actually start like saving all my project files, right? Like project one, and I'll have another folder for like project two, etc. Right? This is the type of way I go about organizing my files, right? So when I'm like on my computer and I'm like, hey, I need to save this thing real quick, I have a folder already on my big computer home folder to save, right? I save it all here, but then I make sure I save it based on what it's relevant to. And as you can see, I try to save each project as a separate thing in a separate folder. And I'll show you why that's helpful. It's helpful because if I go back to VS Code, I can actually open the folder based on what folder I want. And again, like you see here, well, it doesn't show you, but it'll show you that same breakdown of all the folders in my home directory. And so I can click that CS projects folder we created, and I can keep walking down the chain. I can click web dev, and I can say, hey, project one, I want to open. Or if I want to create a new project, I could click new folder there and create a new project right there. So I can say, hey, create a new folder for me right there, project three, and boom, make it happen that way. So, there's a number of different ways to accomplish what I'm talking about, but I'm just kind of trying to talk through what I think is a helpful way to get started so that you keep track of all the files you're going to inevitably end up working with. So let's say I open up that project one folder, and VS Code, right, will reload to that particular folder with, now you can see the Explorer has the name of the folder that I'm in. Now, this is important because it's not so important immediately. You're gonna be like, well, you know what I'm saying? I'm glad you told me this, Cam, but when is this gonna be important? This is important once you start getting into the space of saving your work on like from Git to GitHub and things like that. Knowing that you have a particular folder, you opened a particular folder is actually going to make your work way easier because you can then use VS Code to say, hey, terminal, open a new terminal. And guess what? It's going to open a terminal right into your project folder directly. So now you're certain that every command that you run, right, is going to be run in this particular folder that you're looking at, right? So if I end up using the command line to create a new file, right, that is going to impact this current folder I'm looking at. So I can see like magic. I'm like, oh, I'm doing something in a terminal. It's impacting this code base. If you don't structure things in folders and you open files and then you open the terminal, you're going to be all over the place. Trust me, I see it every year. It just happens that people are like in different parts of the terminal on their different parts of their operating system, changing different things. But opening folders and saving things in folders will make your life way easier. End rant, you know what I'm saying? Let's get back to some HTML. In order for you to start working on HTML, you need to have an HTML file. There's different ways to do this. You just saw me use the terminal to create one using a command called touch. But you can also use VS Code to create files very easily. There's a file add button here, right on top of the Explorer. You can also click file and new file. And again, if you're in a folder, it will save that file into the folder that you're already in. Either way, you can use this button to create as many files as you want. So if I have an index.html, I could have, page2.html, right? I could have page3.html, whatever I want, right? And have all of those things kind of already created. So this is the first step. We need to make sure that we have like a solid open text editor to a place where we can save our files, and we can create files in a nice little folder context like this. The index.html is going to be the file that we're going to spend a lot of time on. So I'm actually going to delete these other ones because I don't really need them right now. And we'll talk about more HTML stuff next time we link up. But let's get to the point of all the stuff we're talking about and make sure that we have a solid working setup for getting our HTML together. So HTML is is like I said, it's simple, but it's complex in that you need to understand the syntax of it to make sure you're structuring your documents appropriately. And like I told y'all before, right? That basically means that you're going to need to use you're going to need to use you're going to need to use I'm sorry. You're going to need to use the you're going to need to use your HTML documents to structure out everything you're expecting from your in your code base. And so let's go back to this document here and start working on a little HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this index.html as a place to start writing some HTML. Now, HTML isn't so complicated that every time you start it is different. It is, though, the case that you're going to see kind of a little bit of funky syntax to start if you're not familiar. But I know a good amount of y'all have already looked into it a bit. So I'm just going to blow this up just a little bit so you can see a little bit better. All HTML documents follow a similar structure for how they're started. They all start with this this line at the top that's like doc type HTML, and the doc type HTML is the doc type HTML is essentially a line that tells the browser that what it's looking at is an HTML document. So this line in and of itself will tell a browser that sees this, hey, this is an HTML document, and I will parse the rest of this document as if it is HTML. That is kind of like, you can think of this like a declaration that says, hey, I am an HTML document. All HTML documents have this declaration at the top. The second thing that all HTML documents have is an HTML tag and an HTML element. And you'll hear me use those words interchangeably. I will explain it in just a second. An HTML element is essentially an element that represents the actual document for your in your file, right? The HTML document, remember, this is what structures the data on to allow for us to show information in HTML on different browsers and web pages. So we need a document, and the HTML document is created by way of an HTML element. And the HTML element is created with two important points. The first point is the opening of an HTML element, and the second point is the closing of that HTML element. Now, elements in HTML open and close, and the reason why that is important is because you can open an element and then put elements inside of it before it closes. And that is actually a very important aspect of how HTML is written. We nest elements inside of other elements. So the HTML element is an element that is going to hold other elements inside of it. The elements that it's going to hold inside of it can vary, and this is what makes every web page a little bit different, is like what actual HTML elements are inside of the HTML document. But there are two elements that are always present inside of an HTML document. No matter what document you're looking at, there's always these two elements. The first element is a head. And the HTML head, and as you can see, one of the things I love about VS Code is that it just auto-completes a lot of the lines for me, which just makes my life way easier, you know? And so the first element that's always present in the HTML document and HTML element is the head. The head is an element that will hold meta information about a document. Now, meta information can be things like the title of the web page of the document. It could be different metadata related to what character set is this document using. Things that define like the viewport size. We even put metadata in the head for search engine optimization. Things like the description of the page and all those little bits of information that pop up when you are sharing links to different web pages. A lot of what that, you know, when you send a link to somebody and it generates like a little picture, a little blurb and stuff like that. a lot of that information is stuff that people put in the head of that website that gets shared through some of those social platforms and messaging and stuff like that. So the head is really a element that we use to hold metadata in our document. The second element that we always will have is a body, and an HTML body is really an HTML body is another element that is important because the HTML body is where we actually put all of the visual elements that we're going to expect to see in our application or in our document in our web page. Now, what you're seeing here, these 5 lines are a valid HTML document. If I save this, this is an actual HTML document. And you might be wondering, well, okay, cool, Cam, this is great. How can I actually see this on a web page, right? Like, well, where do I go to see this, right? Well, there's 2 ways to do it, and I'll show you the first way, which is very easy. And first thing you want to do is go back to your browser, and you can open that HTML file directly in your browser. So you just want to go File, Open File, and find that HTML document that you just created. And for me, it's in my CS projects, web dev, project 1, index.html. So you just want to find that HTML file you create on your computer, press open, and you should see a lovely file open. And if you see something like this, beautiful white background, well, that is just a sign that we actually didn't put any visual elements here. But I will let you in on a little secret, right? One of the cool things about browsers, and again, one of the reasons you're going to use a browser all the time for web dev specific work, is that you can inspect the elements on a website just through the browser, right? Especially if you're using those modern browsers like we talked about before, Chrome, Firefox, Brave, etc., right? All you got to do is look for the developer tools in your browser, right? Most browsers, you can see it very easily if you right click on the web page, and then you'll see something like inspect or view page source, right? If I click view page source, what is this going to show me? This is going to show me the source code for that particular HTML page. And as you can see, here you can see the same HTML that we just wrote in VS Code is right here. So this blank page is still connotating the HTML document that we just created. So while we're not seeing anything per se, we can guarantee that, hey, at least we're seeing the same elements that we just structured in VS Code. So let's actually make this a little bit more useful and easy for us to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back to VS Code, and I'm going to add, remember, the head is where we store metadata and meta information about a page. One of the things that's a pretty commonly used element that you'll see in the head is the title. Sorry, I don't know why this keeps jumping with all caps. So I'm gonna just put a title and just say like my first web page. That's fine. We'll do that. When I save this, right? If I go back to the little file I opened, I don't really see any changes, but watch this top tab when I reload the page. So I'm reload, and as you can see, the top tab now has my first web page as a title. So the title element is an element that we use to change the name of a web page on a tab. It's not like the craziest element, you know what I'm saying? But it's important because imagine we have 50 tabs open. You want to look at that title to know what tab is that tab. This is the element that allows us to change the name of a tab. And another cool thing, just to know, pro tip, is that VS Code, if you hover over elements, it will give you a breakdown of what that element actually is doing, which I really like to just be able to say, oh, cool. So here's where the title element represents the document's title or name, right? So these things are really helpful, these little tool tips that pop up when we hover over certain elements in VS Code. And it's not just HTML. This does this for CSS. It does this for a lot of different languages, which is really helpful. So the head, again, just because we added this element here, but as you can see, nothing changed in terms of our background or anything like that. But that's because the head doesn't actually show visual information. It holds data that is important for the document to know about itself, but the real element that is responsible for all the visual stuff you're going to expect to see on your web page is the HTML body. And to demonstrate this, we'll just add a couple elements to our HTML body. I'm going to add a H1, and that just says hello world to my first HTML page. And I'm going to add a little paragraph, and the paragraph is just going to say, this is a paragraph describing nothing. And I'm going to save this and I'm going to refresh, and boom. Now you can actually see some visual stuff on our actual web page. Again, if I go back to the view page source, you can see this hasn't updated, but once I refresh it, we can actually see all that HTML is actually here. The view page source will open your source code in a new tab, so you can see your HTML by itself in a new tab. But there's also, if you go back and right click on your actual web page, you can actually click inspect and see, you should see something like inspect or view console or something like that if you're using different types of browsers. But the inspect should pull up a developer console for you. And the developer console is helpful because it also provides you a view of the source elements, right? So you can see these elements. But one of the things that makes this a little bit different than just like the view source code here is that if you open the inspector, which is what we call this, you can inspect all of the elements in your document. Again, as you can see, if I highlight over the head, nothing in the body of this document is being highlighted. But if I hover over the body, you can see that hovering over the body contains all of the visual elements. And then with the inspector, I could do cool stuff like look at each element specifically. If once we get into having some CSS in the mix, we can also see all the CSS for each element here. And once we get into some JavaScript, we can actually see output of the JavaScript here in the console. So the developer tools are important because they're going to help you troubleshoot what's going on with your HTML or your CSS or your JavaScript. So we need a browser that has that capability. And the cool thing is we're able to just open HTML files like this so that we can see whatever it is that we're saving locally on this file on VS Code. Remember, all I did, like if you look real closely, this is the path to that HTML file that I created, right? I have on my computer, my users directory, Camino is my personal home folder. CS20 projects was the folder I created to just demonstrate code organization with y'all. I created another folder called web dev. The modulo, the like %20 drawn here is just a way for connotating spaces, so these are just kind of showing that there were spaces in there. Project 1 was the folder that I just started working on. And then I made this file index.html in VS Code with y'all. So this is a path directly to the same file that I started working on and saved by way of VS Code. This same file that's here. And I know that this is the same file because if I go ahead and open the terminal, like I told you in VS Code, right, I can run a very simple command to see what is the path of this particular folder. And as you can see, the path here is users, Camino, CS projects, web dev, project 1, which is the same as this path here, right? This is a URL that is pointing to a file on my local computer. We're used to URLs that are pointing to external files on a server, but URLs can point directly to information on your local computer as well, which is why our browser is able to actually see this particular HTML document in this regard. One thing that you might have noticed though is in the workflow, it's kind of annoying to have to like go to VS Code, right? Make a change here. My first HTML, right? Like it's kind of annoying to make the change here, save the change, and then go back. And this thing is still kind of not updated, right? Until I actually refresh, right? Well, one of the reasons that this is happening is because the browser is only looking at the last version of the file that we loaded, right? So if we want, we need to be able to tell the browser, hey, I want you to see the most current version of that file at all times. And the way we can do that is by way of using what we call a development server. And, servers, if you've been around and seen some of the other videos I've been posting about like first thing to know about web dev and stuff, we talked a little bit about servers before. servers are essentially machines that are going to be listening to traffic on the online and respond with some data when people are requesting specific data. If we use a server, we can host our files and information in a way that our browser can update in real time. And so to do that, one of the cool things, another little real pro tip is VS Code allows for us to actually use a live server ourselves very easily. If we're working on like HTML and CSS type things, it becomes really helpful until we start using JavaScript, in which case a lot of the JavaScript libraries have servers kind of built into their libraries. But let's say you're working on some HTML, like we're going to be working on some HTML, and you want to like make it so that you don't have to keep reloading every time you make a change. You can install a really cool extension, and extensions in VS Code are just like little modular add-ons to your VS Code experience. You can click extensions, which is like this little building block thing here, and you'll see a little search box for extensions, and you're going to want to type in live server. And live server will come up with a couple options, but the one that a lot of people like to use is this one by Ritwik Day, which creates a very simple kind of server logic inside of VS Code that will allow you to open files on a live server. And again, the live server will really just help in making it so that while you're developing your code locally, you can still kind of get like real-time updates of your HTML so that you can see those changes without having to continuously reload and everything. So all you got to do to get the live server is find it, click install here. When you see it, just kind of make sure it matches this logo, says like Ritwik Day. This one has like 44 million downloads or something like that. And it should install. I'm not too sure, to be honest with y'all, why it's taking so long. It never really does take that long. Okay, cool. So it's already installed, which is great. So the live server add-on is going to allow for us to launch, trying to make it so I can show you this whole thing, right? Launch a development local server with live reload. That's really what we want, is like for the server to reload the file whenever it's edited, so that we don't have to go and reload it ourselves. But what's cool is by installing a live server, I can actually run this same HTML file off the live server. So let me do that. I'm just going to close this HTML document that we had before. I'll just open a new tab so my browser doesn't go away. And to use the live server, you'll see that after you install it, there'll be a button down here that says go live. And you can click that button to start the live server, or if you don't see that button, you can right click on your file and you'll see something like open with live server. And when you click that, or you click the button at the bottom, that extension you just added is going to launch your code on a live server. And it'll use your local IP address. So this is the local IP address to my computer. No one else can access this information. If you were to even type this in on your machine, you wouldn't see anything unless you have your live server running at the same port as I do. And again, we'll talk a lot about servers and all of that logic a little later on. But I just wanted to show you that this extension is really, really cool when you're first getting into HTML, because you can start making a lot of changes. So like here, I'm saying this is a paragraph describing nothing. But then like, let's say, but now I added a live server, so I should make it more descriptive. If I save that, you can see it's already reloading the information on that particular instance of the server, which is super cool. Saves you a little bit of time, so you're not having to continuously reload stuff. But now you can just start going crazy and building out HTML sites, right? So let's say like I'm like, oh, you know what I'm saying? Like one of the things I did last year when I was teaching this little bit of lessons, I was like, hey, what if we made a fan club website for our favorite musician or our favorite athlete or something, right? So now I could go ahead and I could start like, the Didier Drogba fan club website. You know what I'm saying? Like change the title, you know what I'm saying? Change a little bit of the header, you know what I'm saying? Didier Drogba, the best soccer player in the league, you know what I'm saying? He ain't playing no more, but you know what I'm saying? The GOAT, we're just gonna say the GOAT. If y'all know who Drogba is, you know what I'm saying? You a real one. If you don't, look him up, you know what I'm saying? But now I can start my Didier Drogba fan club website real easily with the same logic that I just started, right? The same workflow is all I need, and I just need a HTML file to get going, right? Of course, you know, just the title text and the paragraph isn't going to get me very far, especially if I'm making a fan club website. I really like the W3 schools as a resource for continuing to learn HTML because they have a number of different free tutorials on all of the really important things on HTML that you're going to need to know to get yourself up to speed. Um, Everything that you might want to do. Hey, I want to add an image. Okay, cool. You can add an image very easily. Here's how to do it. Here's the HTML type. Here's the HTML element for images, right? This website has a number of different really cool tutorials with like examples and everything based on whatever it is you're trying to add to your HTML file. They also have, if you keep scrolling down there, they have a really cool reference guide to all of the HTML tags that you could use, right? So you can look through and just like even search. Like, let's say you're like, hey, you know, I want to add a video. Oh, cool. Here's how I can add a video. And then you can click and it'll show you an example of how to use that particular tag. I think it's super dope because it adds that value there. They also have the similar tutorials for CSS, JavaScript, all these really cool things. So if you're interested in learning some cool web dev technology, definitely pull up to the W3 schools because it is free, good resources maintained by actual developers of these technologies. So you can bet that they're actually very good tutorials in that sense. But yeah, y'all, you know, HTML is going to be a journey through like us being able to yeah, just add elements based on what we want. So like let's say, you know what I'm saying, I'm just go to Google Images real quick and grab an image of my man Drogba, you know what I'm saying? You know, Didier Drogba the GOAT, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, yeah, you gotta just support our superstar athletes, you know what I mean? So let's say I go here, I'm like, cool, boom, I love this. Didier Drogba, old school Drogba days, you know? And then I'm like, all right, bet, you know what I'm saying? I want to take this, go ahead, copy the image address, and then just like I learned before, I'm like, oh, well, how do I add an image? Well, I can add an image by way of using the image tag. And the image tag is actually a pretty simple tag. You open an image and then you put a source to that particular image, whether that is a file on your machine or in your folder or an external link that you want to use. So I'll just go back here to Didier Drogba the GOAT, add my little image real quick, and in the source, go ahead and add this really long link that I copied from over this way on Google. Wow, that is a very, very long link. Actually, this link is not going to be helpful. I actually got to go here and let's see, open in a new tab, grab the actual link here to make my thing actually work and be like, okay, boom, you know what I'm saying? Like source, whoa. But the source, I like to put alt text because, you know, sometimes the image doesn't load. And I'll say image of Didier Drogba, right? Save that. And if all goes well, I should be able to go back to my little drawing. Oh, and I got this crazy large, that's a crazy large image of Didier Drogba. Well, that is crazy. And this is where things kind of get interesting, right? So as you can see, I'm showing you this to show you that as I'm making these changes, I'm building this website already right now, right? The only thing that's not happening is the styling and all of those things. But cool thing about the W3 schools is it's going to teach you some of these things. So, oh, cool. I can add a width and a height into my image tag to kind of specify those pixels. Well, that's great to know because then I could go ahead and do this and say, oh, boom, let me go ahead and add a nice width and a height. And hopefully that does something, shrinks it down a little bit. It's not the best design, but hey, this is my first job doing a little website. I'm just trying to play around and learn some elements. And that's exactly what you should do is continue to play around. Now that you have your computer set up with the right things you need, you have VS Code, which is a text editor. You have a browser that you can use to see your HTML files. And realistically, those two things are all you need to get started. Node and Git we'll get to over time. We use those as we're trying to get our workflows more professional. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next time we link up. But so long as you download VS Code right now, so long as you download a browser, there's no reason for you to get to the same point that I got to today where you can start actually working on some websites yourself and building out what you need to build out to get your to get the systems the way that you want them to be. So I'm going to leave us at that. And I appreciate y'all. If you were a fan of this little crash course into this draw, give me some love. I'm sweating over here talking so quick to make sure I did this in time. But I'm really excited to see what y'all create. We'll talk a little bit about more work that we can do together on in this front with relationship to web dev stuff. So be on the lookout for some stuff on Slack. And yeah, enjoy your day. You owe me some stuff. Please send it over. And if not, take care. If you have questions, please feel free to stick around and I will be here to answer your questions. And if not, see y'all soon. And